Welcome to our channel. In today's story, we're diving into the gripping tale of shattered vows, the hidden secrets of a cheating wife and her boss. Set against the cozy backdrop of the Sunset Cafe, this story unravels the complex and heart-wrenching journey of Emily Carter, a woman trapped in a web of deception and betrayal. As she reveals her darkest secrets to her husband Michael, we witness the emotional turmoil and the struggles they face together in rebuilding their shattered lives. Join us as we explore themes of love, trust, and redemption in this compelling narrative. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more captivating stories. Sunset Cafe *, nestled in a quiet corner of the small town, exuded a warm and inviting ambiance. The soft glow of hanging lamps cast gentle pools of light on the wooden tables, while the murmur of hushed conversations and the occasional clinking of cups created a comforting background hum. It was the kind of place where people came to escape the world's chaos, to find solace in a cup of coffee and the company of a friend. But for Emily and Michael Carter, the cafe had become a haven for a different reason. It was a chilly autumn afternoon in 2020, the kind of day when the leaves, vibrant in their reds and oranges, danced on the brisk breeze, and the sky hung heavy with the promise of rain. Inside, the warmth of the cafe stood in stark contrast to the tension that hung between Emily and Michael. They sat in a secluded booth at the back, away from prying eyes, the air thick with unspoken words and the weight of Emily's impending confession. Michael's fingers drummed an anxious rhythm on the table, his brow furrowed in concern as he waited for Emily to speak. He had noticed her increasing restlessness over the past few weeks, the way her eyes seemed to carry the burden of some unseen weight, the tension that built up and finally culminated in her request to meet at the cafe that day. Something important, she had said, something necessary. Emily took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, yet now, faced with the reality of her husband's expectant gaze, words seemed to elude her. The cafe's cozy atmosphere did little to ease the heaviness in her chest, the sense of dread that had settled there. "I have something to tell you," Emily finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes met Michael's, seeking the strength she needed to continue. "It's about my past. About something I've never shared with anyone, not even you." Michael leaned forward, concern etching deeper lines into his already furrowed brow. "You can tell me anything, Emily. You know that." His reassurance was what she needed, but it did little to ease the weight of her confession. "It's about my first job in the city, at the marketing firm. About my boss, Mr. Anderson." The mention of the name brought a slight shift in Michael's expression, a hint of recognition, perhaps, or confusion. He had heard about Mr. Anderson, of course, the man who had given Emily her first big break, the man she seldom mentioned and always swiftly changed the subject away from. Michael had always sensed there was more to the story, but he had never pressed, respecting Emily's boundaries. "Go on," Michael urged gently, his eyes locked on hers. Emily's words came tumbling out then, hurried and fragmented as she tried to convey the complexity of what had happened. He took advantage of me, Michael. It started out as just drinks after work, team building trips that were nothing more than excuses for him to." She paused, swallowing hard against the bile that rose in her throat. "To what, Emily?" Michael's voice was soft, but there was a steely undertone of something darker, anger, perhaps, or fear. "It turned into something else," Emily continued, her voice shaking. "Something awful. He coerced me, manipulated me into situations. Abusive situations. It wasn't just an affair, it was control, domination. He made me feel like I had no choice." The silence that followed her words was suffocating. Michael sat back, his face a mask of shock and burgeoning rage. His hands, once restless, were now clenched into fists on his thighs. The soft clinking of cups and the quiet murmur of conversations around them seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the weight of Emily's confession hanging in the air. Emily watched him, her heart pounding, her own pain momentarily eclipsed by the fear of his reaction. "I'm so sorry, Michael. I didn't know how to tell you. I was so ashamed." Michael's voice, when it came, was hoarse, filled with a mix of emotions that he struggled to keep in check. How long did this go on? Almost a year, Emily replied, the shame coloring her cheeks. Until I started something with his boss, Mr. Reynolds. It was the only way I could think of to get away from him. The additional revelation seemed to hit Michael like a physical blow. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping back against the wooden floor. I need some air, he muttered, striding towards the door. Emily watched him go, tears streaming down her face, the floodgates opened by her confession. She knew this was only the beginning, that the road to healing, if there was one, would be long and fraught with challenges. But at least now, the truth was out. At least now, they could start to face it together. Michael wandered aimlessly through the quiet streets, his mind a chaotic whirl of emotions. Rage, disbelief, and a profound sense of betrayal competed for dominance. Every so often, images of Emily, broken and vulnerable as she recounted her ordeal, pierced through the tumult, grounding him in a painful reality. He needed clarity, but every thought that tried to take shape fragmented under the weight of what he had just learned. Meanwhile, Emily sat alone in the dimly lit cafe, her tears having subsided into a dull ache. She felt emptied, hollowed out by her confession, yet there was a bitter relief in having shared her secret. The cafe felt larger, emptier without Michael's presence, and she wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, seeking warmth and comfort in the familiar sensation. After what felt like hours, Michael finally returned, his features hard-set, his eyes red-rimmed. He paused at the doorway, taking in Emily's forlorn figure at the table. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but his voice was calm when he spoke. We need to talk about this. All of it. I can't begin to understand what you've been through, but I want to. I need to, he said, his voice firm yet tinged with care. Emily nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of fear and gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice steadier than she felt. She gestured to the seat beside her, and Michael sat down, turning to face her fully. Tell me everything, he said. Start from the beginning. And so she did. Emily spoke of her early days at the firm, bright-eyed and eager to make her mark. She detailed how Mr. Anderson had initially appeared supportive, offering her opportunities that seemed too good to refuse. But soon, those opportunities turned into obligations, and the after-work drinks became a gateway to more sinister events. She described the trips, supposedly for team building, where Anderson isolated her from her colleagues and manipulated her into compliance. The degrading acts, the coercion, the control, he wielded his authority like a weapon, and she, trapped by her circumstances and her own crumbling mental health, felt powerless to resist. Was there no one you could turn to? Michael asked, his voice a blend of anger and sorrow. I thought about it, Emily admitted. But he was so influential, and I was so broken. I didn't think anyone would believe me. The confession went on, and with each word, Michael felt a piece of his anger give way to a profound sadness for his wife's suffering. It was a complex tapestry of emotions, but as the night wore on, his resolve hardened. He needed to support Emily through this, to help her heal from the wounds of her past. As the sky outside the cafe began to darken, casting a pale light through the windows, they found themselves exhausted but connected in a way they hadn't been for a long time. Michael reached out, taking Emily's hand in his, squeezing it gently. We'll get through this together, he promised. Whatever it takes. Emily nodded, tears in her eyes not just from sorrow but also from a burgeoning sense of hope. Together, she echoed. The initial shock of Emily's revelation still hung in the air between them, but there was an unspoken understanding that this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. Michael's hand remained clasped around Emily's, a silent pledge of his support and determination to understand her ordeal fully. The hum of the cafe seemed to fade into the background as Emily prepared to delve deeper into her past, to lay bare the secrets she had kept hidden for so long. Emily took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the table as she began to recount the details of her first job at the marketing firm. It all started in 2015, she said, her voice steady despite the tremors of emotion running through her. I was fresh out of college, eager to prove myself. The job at Anderson Marketing was a dream come true. Mr. Anderson, He seemed like a mentor at first, always offering guidance and opportunities. Michael listened intently, his heart aching for the younger version of Emily, so full of hope and ambition, unaware of the darkness that lay ahead. He squeezed her hand gently, urging her to continue. At first, everything was great. I was given projects that challenged me, allowed me to grow. Mr. Anderson was always there with advice, encouraging me to push my boundaries. But then, things started to change. The after-work drinks, the late-night meetings, they became more frequent. He would insist on staying late to review my progress. Emily's voice quivered as she spoke, the memories clearly painful. One night, after one of those late meetings, he suggested we grab a drink at a nearby bar. I didn't think much of it at the time, he was my boss, and I wanted to stay in his good graces. But at the bar, things took a different turn. He started making comments, personal comments, about my appearance, my life outside of work. I felt uncomfortable, but I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to jeopardize my position. Michael's jaw tightened, anger simmering beneath the surface. The idea of anyone making Emily feel uncomfortable, of manipulating her trust, was infuriating. But he kept his focus on her, knowing that his reactions needed to be controlled, supportive. That night was the beginning of a pattern, Emily continued. The drinks became more frequent, the comments more suggestive. He started touching my arm, my back, lingering touches that made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off, to convince myself that I was overreacting. But it only got worse. He started inviting me to weekend retreats, supposedly for team building. These retreats were nothing more than opportunities for him to isolate me, to manipulate me. Emily paused, her eyes glistening with tears. She wiped them away quickly, taking another deep breath. He knew I was alone in the city, that I didn't have many friends or family nearby. He used that against me, making me feel like I owed him for the opportunities he gave me. The first time he crossed the line, really crossed it, was during one of those retreats. He came to my room late at night, drunk. He forced himself on me. I tried to fight him off, but he was stronger. He said if I ever told anyone, I'd lose my job, my reputation. I was terrified. Michael's grip on her hand tightened, his knuckles white. Emily, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how scared you must have been. It went on for almost a year, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. He would corner me in the office, at these retreats, use his power to force me into submission. I felt trapped, like there was no way out. I started to withdraw, to isolate myself even more. I was afraid of everyone, everything. I didn't know who to trust. The cafe around them seemed to fade into the background as Emily continued her harrowing tale. She spoke of the nights spent crying herself to sleep, the mornings where she forced herself to put on a brave face and go to work, knowing what awaited her. She recounted the times she considered quitting, running away, but felt paralyzed by fear and shame. Then, one day, I met Mr. Reynolds, Mr. Anderson's boss, Emily said, a hint of hope entering her voice. He seemed different, kind. He took an interest in my work, started offering his own guidance. I thought he could be an ally, someone who could help me escape Mr. Anderson's control. I was wrong. Michael's eyes darkened with understanding. He wasn't any different, was he? No, Emily said, shaking her head. At first, he seemed like a savior. He would listen to me, offer advice, make me feel seen. But then, he started making his own advances, subtler at first. He knew about Mr. Anderson, and he used that knowledge to manipulate me. He made me feel safe, only to exploit that trust. When I realized what was happening, I felt even more trapped. I didn't know how to escape either of them. The weight of Emily's words settled heavily on Michael's shoulders. The extent of the manipulation and abuse she had endured was staggering. He couldn't fathom the strength it had taken for her to survive, to keep going despite everything. One day, I couldn't take it anymore, Emily continued, her voice breaking. I packed my things and left. I quit my job, blocked their numbers, and moved to a different part of the city. I was so scared, but it was the only way I could think to escape. I spent months living in fear, looking over my shoulder, afraid they would find me. But slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I met you, and for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Michael felt a surge of pride mixed with sorrow. He was grateful that Emily had found the courage to leave, that she had found her way to him. But the knowledge of her suffering was a heavy burden. I'm so sorry you went through that alone, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. I wish I could have been there for you, to protect you. You're here now, Emily said, her eyes meeting his. That's what matters. I needed you to know. I couldn't keep it a secret anymore. It was eating me alive. Michael nodded, understanding the gravity of her confession. We'll get through this together, he repeated, his resolve strengthening. We'll face it head on. You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore. As the afternoon light began to fade outside, casting long shadows across the cafe, Michael and Emily sat together, their hands entwined. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and healing, but for the first time, they faced it together, with a newfound understanding and commitment to each other. The initial shock of Emily's revelation had worn off, but the raw emotions it uncovered lingered between them. Michael's mind was a chaotic whirlpool of anger, sorrow, and a profound sense of helplessness. He had always prided himself on being Emily's protector, the one she could rely on, but now he was confronted with the painful reality that he hadn't been there when she needed him most. The cafe, with its warm and inviting atmosphere, seemed an incongruous backdrop for the dark and painful conversation they were having. Michael stood abruptly, the need for fresh air and clarity overwhelming. I need some air, he muttered, striding towards the door without waiting for Emily's response. Outside, the crisp autumn air hit him like a wave, the coolness a stark contrast to the heated emotions roiling within him. He wandered aimlessly through the quiet streets, the vibrant fall foliage doing little to soothe his troubled mind. Every step seemed to echo with the weight of Emily's words, the images of her suffering replaying in his mind with relentless clarity. Rage, disbelief, and a deep-seated sense of betrayal competed for dominance in his heart. How could anyone do that to her? The thought was a constant refrain, a burning question that had no satisfactory answer. He couldn't fathom the kind of cruelty that Mr. Anderson and Mr. Reynolds had inflicted on his wife, the manipulations and abuse that had shattered her sense of safety and trust. The knowledge that she had faced it alone, trapped in a web of fear and shame, was a bitter pill to swallow. After what felt like hours, Michael found himself at the edge of a small park, the serene setting a stark contrast to his inner turmoil. He sank onto a bench, his head in his hands, struggling to make sense of his emotions. The anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but it was tempered by a profound sadness for Emily's suffering. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to think clearly. This wasn't about him, it was about Emily. She had borne the brunt of this trauma, had lived with the fear and the shame for years. She had finally found the strength to share her secret, to let him in on the darkest parts of her past. He couldn't let his own emotions overshadow the support she needed from him now. With newfound resolve, Michael stood up and began walking back to the cafe. His steps were more measured, his mind clearer. He knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey, but he was determined to face it with Emily, to help her heal and rebuild their relationship. When he re-entered the cafe, he saw Emily sitting at the table, her shoulders slumped and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. The sight tugged at his heart, filling him with a renewed sense of purpose. He crossed the room and sat down beside her, reaching out to take her hand in his. We need to talk about this. All of it. I can't begin to understand what you've been through, but I want to. I need to, he said, his voice firm yet tinged with care. Emily nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of fear and gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice steadier than she felt. She gestured to the seat beside her, and Michael sat down, turning to face her fully. Tell me everything, he said. Start from the beginning. And so she did. Emily spoke of her early days at the firm, bright-eyed and eager to make her mark. She detailed how Mr. Anderson had initially appeared supportive, offering her opportunities that seemed too good to refuse. But soon, those opportunities turned into obligations, and the after-work drinks became a gateway to more sinister events. She described the trips, supposedly for team building, where Anderson isolated her from her colleagues and manipulated her into compliance. The degrading acts, the coercion, the control, he wielded his authority like a weapon, and she, trapped by her circumstances and her own crumbling mental health, felt powerless to resist. Was there no one you could turn to? Michael asked, his voice a blend of anger and sorrow. I thought about it, Emily admitted. But he was so influential, and I was so broken. I didn't think anyone would believe me. The confession went on, and with each word, Michael felt a piece of his anger give way to a profound sadness for his wife's suffering. It was a complex tapestry of emotions, but as the night wore on, his resolve hardened. He needed to support Emily through this, to help her heal from the wounds of her past. As the afternoon light began to fade outside, casting long shadows across the cafe, Michael and Emily sat together, their hands entwined. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and healing, but for the first time, they faced it together, with a newfound understanding and commitment to each other. Michael looked at Emily, his gaze unwavering. We'll get through this together, he promised. Whatever it takes. Emily nodded, tears in her eyes not just from sorrow but also from a burgeoning sense of hope. Together, she echoed. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with difficulties, but for the first time, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Michael by her side, and together, they would face whatever came their way. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting the small town into darkness. Inside the Sunset Cafe, the warm glow of the hanging lamps created an intimate atmosphere, cocooning Emily and Michael in a bubble of relative calm amidst the storm of emotions. As they sat together, hands intertwined, Emily knew there was more she needed to share. The road to healing required complete honesty, no matter how painful. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself for the next part of her confession. There's more, Michael, she began, her voice soft but steady. I need to tell you about Mr. Reynolds. Michael's eyes darkened with understanding. He wasn't any different, was he? Emily shook her head. No. At first, he seemed like a savior. He knew about Mr. Anderson and presented himself as someone who could help me. I was desperate for any way out, and I thought he could be the answer. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The memories of Mr. Reynolds were less overtly traumatic than those of Mr. Anderson, but they were insidious in their own way, eroding her sense of trust and safety even further. When I first met him, he was kind, supportive. He listened to me, offered advice, made me feel like I had an ally. But as time went on, his behavior changed. He started making his own advances, subtle at first. He would compliment me, touch my arm or shoulder in ways that made me uncomfortable. He knew exactly what he was doing. Michael's jaw tightened, anger simmering beneath the surface. He used your vulnerability against you. Yes, Emily confirmed, her eyes filling with tears. He knew I was desperate to escape Mr. Anderson, and he exploited that. He made me feel safe, only to use that trust for his own gain. I felt so stupid, so naive for falling for it. You were in a terrible situation, Michael said, his voice gentle but firm. None of this is your fault. Emily nodded, grateful for his support. I realized too late what he was doing. By then, I felt completely trapped, caught between two men who were using me for their own purposes. I didn't know how to escape, how to find a way out. The memories of those dark days washed over her, and she took a moment to steady her breathing. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things and left. I quit my job, blocked their numbers, and moved to a different part of the city. I was so scared, but it was the only way I could think to escape. I spent months living in fear, looking over my shoulder, afraid they would find me. But slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I met you, and for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Michael squeezed her hand, his heart aching for the pain she had endured. You're so strong, Emily. What you went through, it's unimaginable. But you're here, and you've overcome so much. Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and love. I couldn't have done it without you. Meeting you, being with you, it gave me hope. It made me believe that I could have a future, that I could be happy again. Michael's gaze was unwavering. We'll get through this together, he repeated, his resolve strengthening with each word. "We'll face it head on. You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore." Emily felt a surge of hope and relief. She had carried the weight of her past for so long, and now, for the first time, she felt lighter, as if sharing her story had released some of the pain that had been festering inside her. As the night wore on, they continued to talk, unraveling the tangled web of Emily's past and the effects it had on her present. Michael listened with a mix of empathy and determination, his love for Emily growing stronger with each painful revelation. He knew the journey ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it with her, one step at a time. In the days that followed, Emily and Michael began to take tangible steps towards healing. They sought out a therapist who specialized in trauma, someone who could guide them through the complex process of recovery. The sessions were difficult, often bringing up painful memories and emotions, but they were also cathartic, providing a safe space for Emily to confront her past and begin to heal. Michael was there every step of the way, supporting Emily in any way he could. He attended therapy sessions with her, learned about the effects of trauma, and found ways to help her feel safe and supported. Their relationship, once strained by the weight of unspoken secrets, began to strengthen, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual support. One rainy afternoon, as they sat in the softly lit therapist's office, Emily spoke about the second affair with Mr. Reynolds, the boss of Mr. Anderson. This was a different kind of manipulation, less overtly abusive but equally damaging. Reynolds had presented himself as a savior, a gentleman who took her away from Anderson's direct control. However, his kindness was a facade that barely concealed his opportunistic intentions. "He made me feel safe at first," Emily explained, her voice low. "He knew about Anderson, and he used that to his advantage. He was subtler, but in the end, it was all about what he could get from me. When I was vulnerable, when I was hurting, he stepped in not to help me, but to use me for his own ends." Michael listened, his jaw clenched, the anger at these men who had exploited his wife's vulnerability still a raw, seething presence in the back of his mind. But as the therapist guided them through the conversation, he learned to channel that anger into support for Emily, understanding more about the complex web of coercion and dependency that had ensnared her. The breakthrough came when they discussed the moment Emily decided to leave her job and cut all ties with both men. It was a harrowing period, marked by fear and uncertainty, but also by a burgeoning sense of agency that Emily hadn't felt in years. "I was terrified," she admitted, squeezing Michael's hand tightly. "But it was also the first decision I made for myself in a long time. Leaving that job, blocking them, it was like I could finally breathe again." Michael, moved by her courage, felt a swell of pride amidst the turmoil. "I wish I had known, I wish I could have helped you through it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you are helping me now," Emily responded, her eyes meeting his. "Being here, listening, trying to understand, that means everything." Their sessions often ended with tears, but also with laughter, as they rediscovered aspects of their relationship that had been buried under years of silence and secrets. They learned to communicate openly, to support each other without judgment, and to rebuild the trust that had been so severely damaged. One day, after a particularly intense session, Michael suggested a walk in the nearby park. The air was crisp, the remnants of rain glistening on the leaves, and as they walked, they found themselves discussing the future for the first time in a long while. "We can't change the past," Michael said, his arm around Emily's shoulders, "but we can build a future, one step at a time." Emily smiled, leaning into him. "Yes, and maybe, just maybe, we can find happiness again." The words hung in the air, a promise of hope and renewal. As they continued their walk, the path ahead seemed less daunting, illuminated by the strength of their commitment to each other and the possibilities of a future built on love and understanding. The journey towards healing was far from straightforward. It was a path fraught with setbacks and small victories, each step requiring immense courage and resilience. Emily and Michael had committed to facing it together, and this commitment became their anchor in the storm of recovery. Therapy sessions had become a regular part of their routine. Emily found herself opening up in ways she had never imagined, peeling back layers of pain and fear that had been buried for years. Michael was there beside her, offering a steady presence, his support unwavering. One particularly difficult session focused on Emily's feelings of shame and guilt. These emotions had been her constant companions, gnawing at her self-worth and coloring her perception of the world. As she sat across from her therapist, Dr. Jacobs, the air in the room felt heavy with the weight of her unspoken words. "I feel so ashamed," Emily began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ashamed that I let it happen, that I didn't fight back harder." Dr. Jacobs leaned forward, her expression compassionate but firm. "Emily, what you went through was not your fault. The shame and guilt you feel are a result of the manipulation and abuse you suffered. You were in an incredibly difficult situation, and you did what you had to do to survive." Michael nodded, his heart aching for Emily. "You were so strong, even when you felt powerless. You found a way out, and that's something to be proud of." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and pain. "It's hard to see it that way. Sometimes it feels like I'll never be able to shake this feeling, like it's a part of me now." "It's a part of your experience, but it doesn't define you," Dr. Jacobs said gently. "Healing is a process, and it's okay to have these feelings. The important thing is to recognize them for what they are and to keep moving forward." The words resonated with Emily, though the path to truly internalizing them would be long. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm trying. I really am." After the session, Michael suggested they visit a nearby botanical garden. The idea of being surrounded by nature, in a place of beauty and tranquility, seemed like the perfect antidote to the emotional intensity of their therapy. As they walked through the garden, the vibrant colors and fragrant blooms provided a soothing backdrop. Emily found herself relaxing, the tension in her shoulders easing as she breathed in the fresh air. Michael walked beside her, their hands occasionally brushing together, a silent reminder of their connection. "This place is beautiful," Emily said softly, her eyes taking in the myriad of flowers and plants. "It feels peaceful." Michael smiled, relieved to see her more at ease. "I thought it might help. Sometimes, being in a beautiful place can remind us that there's still beauty and goodness in the world, even when things feel dark." Emily nodded, her gaze lingering on a particularly striking rose bush. "I needed this. Thank you." They continued to walk, the conversation turning to lighter topics. They spoke of their hopes for the future, of dreams that had been put on hold and new ones that had emerged. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a glimmer of excitement about what lay ahead. As they neared a small pond, they sat on a bench, watching the koi fish swim lazily in the clear water. Emily turned to Michael, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said, about building a future one step at a time," she began. "I want to do that. I want to find new ways to be happy, to feel whole again." Michael's eyes softened, his hand reaching out to take hers. "We'll do it together, Emily. Whatever it takes, we'll find our way." Their journey was marked by small but significant milestones. Emily began to pursue interests that had long been dormant, finding joy in activities that made her feel alive and connected to the world. She took up painting, something she had always loved but had abandoned in the midst of her trauma. The act of creating, of putting brush to canvas, became a form of therapy, a way to express emotions that words couldn't capture. Michael supported her endeavors wholeheartedly, attending art shows and even setting up a small studio in their home. He found his own solace in writing, channeling his emotions into stories and essays that helped him process the complexities of their shared journey. Their home, once a place of silent dinners and unspoken grievances, transformed into a sanctuary of creativity and mutual support. They filled it with art, music, and laughter, reclaiming their space and their lives. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, surrounded by Emily's paintings and Michael's books, Emily turned to him, her expression serene. "I want to renew our vows," she said, her voice steady. "Not just as a symbol of our commitment to each other, but as a way to celebrate how far we've come. I want to mark this new chapter in our lives." Michael's eyes filled with emotion. "I'd love that," he replied, his voice thick with love and gratitude. "It would mean so much to me too." Plans for the vow renewal ceremony took shape, and on a crisp winter's day, they stood together in their backyard, a simple arch decorated with winter flowers standing as a testament to their journey. Their closest friends and family gathered to witness the occasion, the air filled with warmth and joy. Emily wore a simple white dress, a symbol of new beginnings, and Michael, a suit that spoke more of their everyday life than of grandeur. As they spoke their vows, their voices were strong, clear, and certain. I take you again, Emily, with all that I am and all that I have. I promise to respect you, to cherish our moments, both easy and challenging, and to love you faithfully through the best and the worst. I take you again, Michael, as my partner, my support, my love. I promise to share with you my time and my attention, to bring joy, strength, and imagination to our relationship, and to love you in all your forms. Their words hung in the cold air, breaths visible like delicate puffs of hope. When they kissed, it was a seal not just of a promise to continue, but of a promise fulfilled, a battle won together. As the small gathering dispersed, Emily and Michael took a moment to stand alone, watching their children play in the fading light. Turning to Michael, Emily took his hand, squeezing it gently. We've been through so much, she said softly. Yes, but look at us now, Michael replied, squeezing back. Stronger than ever. And in that moment, with the cold air swirling around them and the warmth of their hands intertwined, they both felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The future was uncertain, as all futures are, but they faced it together, healed not just by time but by love, understanding, and the shared commitment to never let go of each other again. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through Shattered Vows, the hidden secrets of a cheating wife and her boss. We've witnessed Emily and Michael navigate the painful truths of Emily's past, the betrayal and manipulation she endured, and their courageous steps towards healing and rebuilding their relationship. Their story is a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and resilience. As they face the future together, stronger and more connected than ever, we are reminded that even the deepest wounds can heal with time, understanding, and unwavering support. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And remember to hit the notification bell so you never miss another captivating tale. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.